Okay, this is the quadratic formula, part 1. And I've written your typical quadratic equation, and I've kept it totally general, no numbers. And what we're going to do is we're going to rearrange all this by the method of completing the square. And once we've completed the squares, we're going to have a formula that's going to speed up the solving of quadratic equations. So if we were going to solve by completing the squares, I would do a couple of steps here, and maybe I'll do two at the same time. First things, I'm going to divide everything by a. Okay, so everything here gets divided by a, just so that I don't have any number in front of the x squared. Now 0 also gets divided by a, but of course that stays as 0. So here's what we've got now, x squared plus b over a x. And I'm going to move this other guy here to the other side. So that's going to be negative c over a. Now, if I was going to complete the squares, I would need half of this b over a. So let me even do that to, let's see if we can cram that in on this side here. So we need half of b over a. What's that going to look like? Well, that's going to be b over 2a. And of course, to complete the square, I want this thing to be squared. So that's going to end up looking like this. We're going to have plus b squared on the top, and on the bottom, 2a times 2a is 4a squared. Now I'm going to bring that in on the right side as well. So I've got b squared over 4a squared. Okay, so that's going to complete the square. Now what I'm going to do is factor this guy here. So I'm going to have x, and this will be plus, and all squared. And I'm just going to think, well, what times itself gives me b squared over 4a squared? This would be b over 2a. And on the right side, I'm going to build a common denominator so I can put these two fractions together. Now that common denominator is 4a squared, so I'm going to multiply on this guy, top and bottom, by 4a. Okay, so here's what I've got on the right side. My common denominator is 4a squared. And over here I'm going to have negative 4a times c, so negative 4ac, and then I've got plus the b squared. There's the right side as one fraction. Okay, now I'm going to take the square roots of both sides and do the same thing over here. Okay, and that's also going to be plus or minus. So plus or minus. Now that gets rid of the squaring, so now I have x plus b over 2a. And that equals, and over on this side, I got plus or minus. Now I'm just going to square root the top and bottom separately. So the square root of the top, well, there's really not much I can do, but I'm going to switch the order so it looks a little bit neater. I'm going to put the positive b squared first, and then the minus 4ac. So minus 4ac. And then on the bottom, I can actually work out the square root of 4a squared, because that's just going to be 2a. And there's one last thing left to do, and I might just have enough room to put that in here. I'm going to subtract b over 2a to the other side. Notice that you have a common denominator. So it's going to look like this. You've got your common denominator of 2a, then we've brought over the negative b over the 2a, and then I have plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. Well, guess what? This solves for x. This is the quadratic formula right here. And so if somebody were to come along and tell you what is a, b, and c, you could go directly to this and just plug in the numbers. And that's exactly what I'm going to do with an example. So I'm just going to clear the screen here, and I'm going to just rewrite so we know what we have. The quadratic formula gives us this. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So we've got that there. Suppose somebody comes along as an example and says we wish to solve the following. 4x squared minus 3x minus 1 equals 0. Well, this is great. It's already equal to 0, and we've got our x squared, our x, and our number. So I can identify very clearly that a is 4, b is negative 3, and c is negative 1. So I'm just going to put these numbers in according to this formula up here, and that's going to solve for x. So x is equal to, and so we've got negative b. Now b is a negative number, so be careful you don't miss that it's a negative 3, plus or minus the square root of. Now b is going to get squared. I'll write it in here, but be careful with this. We know that it's going to turn into positive 9, and sometimes on a calculator, if you don't use brackets, you're going to get negative 9. It might be easier when you're doing this on a calculator just to know it is going to be 3 squared, and don't worry about that negative. And then we have minus 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is negative 1. Okay, so that's all under this radical sign. And then on the bottom I have 2 times a. So all I got to do now is work out the numbers. So we have positive 3 plus or minus the square root of, now this is positive 9, and here I have a minus 4 times negative 1, so that's going to turn into plus 4 times 1, which is 16, and that's all over 8. And so if I just keep going here, what that boils down to is 3 plus or minus the square root of 25 all over 8. Now I can work that one out, and if they're numbers like that, you should work them out. I mean, if you could actually work out the square root of 25 as 5, you should never leave it as a radical. So I have two answers here now. I have 3 plus 5 divided by 8. And of course, that works out to be 8 divided by 8, so it's 1. And the other number is 3 minus 5 divided by 8. And of course, that is going to be negative 2 over 8. And we'll just write all that down. Negative 2 over 8, which is negative 1/4. So you should work out what your solutions are. There's 1 and negative 1/4. And that's where I'm going to stop with our first look here at the quadratic formula.